Welcome, Ben.
Glad to be here, Hunter. Groovy as it is. Groovy is underused. So I think that groovy is a very let's bring groovy back. Okay.
Let's bring in groovy back, right?
Yes.
Like I don't know what the kids are saying today, so maybe groovy will come on back because everything's coming back around, right? The 90s are in right now, 70s.
Baggy, pleated, you name it. All these things that I donated and or was horrified in my youth because I looked like awkward now is what everyone's that's a model is wearing in the West Village. So
Isn't it
um
wild? It's
what
wild how things happen. My dad told me it was going to happen to me too, and here we are.
Here we
Here
are.
we
Well,
are.
Hunter, I got to tell you before we dive in, I'm a little starstruck because I was a huge fan of the Outs.
Oh my gosh,
And
Ben.
and I was like, wait, Hunter? And I was like, is that the Hunter from the Outs? And so yeah, so I'm just like in your IMDb page and all of it. So I am very excited. This is a nice, delightful surprise to have you in this conversation with me. So
I love that. Thank you so much for saying that, Ben. I really, really appreciate that. And I don't know if you know, but Alan Cumming is going to be here tomorrow. And I met him through that show.
oh,
So
that's what, yeah. I just had
that's
heard Rob had just told me, and that's quite a get because Alan has been up to a lot, and I heard he's getting a Hollywood star. I heard, and
yeah, I
Rob,
was literally so we pre-recorded not to talk about another conversation that isn't your talk too long, but yes, he's getting a star, and we were pre-recorded his thing yesterday. He literally got the call while we were doing the thing, and he was like,
wow.
"You'll never guess what just happened. It's crazy." It was like,
You're
"Oh,
like, yes, it is,
this
Alan.
is
Yes, it
wild."
is. Yes, it is.
So yep. Okay, well, this is so delightful. I love that. Thank you.
Yes.
So now people know more about me. Let's hear more about you, Ben. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey before we jump into the questions.
Sure. I'm here in New York City. I live in Chelsea. This is my home office slash living room slash entertainment center slash multi-purpose everything.
Mhm.
And I've been in New York almost 20 years. I never thought I'd be in HR or in DEI. I was in engineering and management consulting and airlines and defense stuff. But through some negative experience I had as a gay person in my first company in New York that I worked at, co-founded, I should say, the employee resource group, and we changed a lot of policies. I got involved in Don't Ask to Tell repeal at the national level, and we helped repeal the law, and just got really fired up around leveling the playing field. And it was a very exciting arc starting in like 2006 or so to now about LGBT rights. Has just changed a lot. Obviously, we're facing a lot of headwinds right now, but really it was my calling that I didn't know I was looking for. And then really all the thread through all that is helping people fulfill their potential. So coaching, leadership development has just been a passion of mine. I was an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts as a kid. Disproportionate number of Eagle Scouts are LGBTQ. I read some data on that, and just always have been fired up about helping people kind of be their best selves or find their best selves. So
I love that. That's so beautiful. And thanks for sharing that because it's such a testament that the challenges and adversities can actually lead us to our greatest potential.
mhm.
Whereas, like, I had a really negative experience, so I went out and did the thing I wanted to see happen.
It's one of those things that not what everyone should do. And some people have very traumatizing things and it shouldn't be put on the backs of everyone. But if you feel up for it, I mean, it's quite a galvanizing. Someone had back when I used to be on Twitter before it got really bad and toxic, someone put a thread up, when were you radicalized? And I
Mm,
was like, oh, I was radicalized when the person that hired me called me a fag at work in my second week of working at a firm full of Ivy League people in a very
yeah,
nice building on really sophisticated things. And he didn't even know I was gay. That was so it was just like, okay, we gotta change these things and
yeah.
make an impact. So it's really great that Power to Fly is hosting this. They were great partners of Pilot and my company. Our mission at our company is for everyone to feel powerful at work. And so
Mm,
we do that by developing the power from the inside out, right? Our own
mm.
confidence and sense of self and awareness and needs and ability to advocate and get feedback. And I really think that's the sustainable change we can make in diverse communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So how is it at Pilot? I'd love to hear more about that. About what is it that you do exactly? Like, what is the hands-on experience to foster that sense of equity and inclusion in the workplace and empowerment, like you were saying?
So we help companies grow talent, develop people. And that's a big challenge. If you read engagement surveys, when people fill out their annual survey, Do I have good growth opportunities? Am I getting feedback? Am I learning? Am I being challenged? Am I stimulated? The answer is often no. And then organizations like, okay, what do we do? I don't know. And so then they often will call a company like ours. So
Mm,
we put together, we have an award-winning 6-month employee development program that's totally virtual, and it brings cohorts of employees together, sometimes from employee resource groups or business resource groups, underrepresented minority talent that isn't yet at the kind of the C-suite or the executive level, but they're
mm.
emerging leaders, which is really the future. And then we help them develop over a 6-month program of a weekly touch point of coaching and feedback and development, et cetera. But it's all designed to help them be large and in charge in their own shoes. So
I love that, large and in charge.
yeah.
That's great. So what are some of the key elements of impactful leadership develop program? Like what, I hear that that you do these things with them, but what is it like? What are the milestones in that workshop that you have?
So one of the things that we talk DEI a lot, and or DEIB or DEI, the J is alphabet soup, and we kind of just think DEI, and we talk a lot about the D and a lot about the I. The I in particular, because it seems like the most addressable. We're like, okay, let's have a Heritage Month celebration. Let's do this. Let's hang flags up. Like, great. The D, do we have enough? Does the board have women on it? Does our executive team have this? The representative. But the equity piece, we all kind of were like, yeah, equity, that's a good idea, but no one really knows sort of how to make equity happen. Pay equity is a thing you can do, but the lawyers, having worked in HR, will never let you talk about the fact that you didn't have pay equity before. So you can say we're committed to pay equity and we have a program now, but you can't really admit the fact that there were gaps or you could get sued. And so you fix it. So there's not a lot on the equity side, whereas developing leaders is an equity play, because it's a way to level, quality and equity are different, but equity is helping to level that playing field, because we start, based on your zip code, you're born in the United States, you start at a different starting line. And your point about adversity, there's a wonderful book by Ryan Holiday called The Obstacle is the Way. And it's sort of stoic wisdom and philosophy around adversity being one of the best developmental forces. And so LGBTQ people and other people from underrepresented or non-traditional demographics often have a lot of that. And so when they come into a program like ours, we first of all expand their idea of what a leader means. At many organizations, they call it a leadership position. And I really encourage people to not use that term, because we've all seen people in a senior executive role that are absolutely not good leaders. So if it's a position, like, would they have to be a good leader for that? It really, and you see people that can be a receptionist, can be an amazing leader. And so we really say leadership is how you behave, and it's how you think and how you act. So we first of all expand that definition of leadership. So people say, well, whether I supervise an employee or not, do I have a team or not, doesn't matter. You can be a leader, right? Oh, my client facing, doesn't matter. I can be a leader. So that's like the first most important thing. And then we have people really commit to growing and realizing that it's okay and it's safe, because a lot of times in the workplace, we get rewarded on perfectionism. Green status, everything's good. We're on plan. We have it all figured out. There's no complaints. And it's always like, everything's good. But developmentally, we need to say, hey, Hunter, I've got some feedback for you. Or, hey, Ben, I think you could grow in this. And have that be not something that's threatening, like you could lose your job or something. So it's kind of that safe space. And then, of course, really having a consistency, because we all have gone to things for a weekend or an evening or a conference. And there's what's called the seminar effect. You lose about 85% of what you learn within 30 days of a seminar. And so we believe in this. That's why we do 6 months and a weekly touch point, is because that's the incremental consistency. You can imagine if you, went to the gym for 3 days straight versus going 1 hour a week for 6 months, you'd have different results and start to stack in that incremental consistency. So we bring a lot of those things together, and that's not unique to Pilot necessarily, but that is really creating the structure to help people do the things they probably want to do or even know to do, like think about themselves, ask for feedback, define goals, grow and learn, these other things, like be self-aware, like invest in their manager relationship. But we just don't do them because we get busy, or all this technology is here to distract us, and people make money off of our eyeballs and our fingers. And so that's a big part of like making sure at the base level, these programs allow us to focus on ourselves, much like people like therapy or maybe their faith or certain exercise or other artistic pursuits, because it allows them to be in nature, to connect with themselves. This is sort of the workplace equivalent of like, how do you connect with you? So you're not just working in your job, but sort of on your career.
Right. It's a holistic approach, because we can't separate ourselves from our work life, unless you're in that television show Severance. I think that is the exploration of that.
Yes, yes, and whatever happened to me, you mentioned, your parents and growing up with hippies, that will impact how you show up in a team. I have a friend, she grew up with 8 siblings.
Woo!
She's like, I was born into a team. But she said, look,
Mm.
we also knew that if you didn't speak up, you didn't eat. So she's sometimes even aggressive at getting what she needs, but that explains her behavior in a group. And she's very social, likes to interact with a lot of people. So all these things that happen often in our childhood, even or outside of work, really affect who we are at work. But if we don't take the time, and part of our program, we talk about, sort of sharing your formative experiences and having executives do that as well, that help
Mm.
people understand how you wound up. So we had an executive once he worked at a data science company in Paris, but he was like, I grew up in rural Michigan on a farm. And I feel like such a fraud sometimes because I didn't come from some pedigreed thing. And they're like, you're the chief customer officer at this big hotshot company. And so that's the part where we start to bring in, it doesn't necessarily mean just because of your skin color, your sexual orientation or identity or gender identity. It's like, it can be those demographics, but it can also just be the formative experiences, which can be positive or adverse. Imagine someone that was a military brat and they moved every year.
Right.
They're really good at making new friends, but they don't get that deep because they're going to move on. And so all of that affects us, but we don't really explore it because we're just like, what school did you go to? What was your last job? What was your title? What certificates do you have? We kind of just assume in this very technical sense, but part of
Mhm.
the leadership development is understanding you've got these soft power skills that it may be because you run your summer beach share and you're the one that's large and in charge and gets all of your crazy friends to pay bills and follow rules and everything else like that. That may be actually where you learned how to run a team and not in the insurance company you work for.
Right. 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 I love that. Have you found when working with people, it sounds like your work is very vulnerable. Uh, how is that working with people when you're like, tell me about your informative experiences as a child?
Well, I think, it's vulnerable with consent, right? It's not meaning like if you don't want to be, you don't have to be, because at the end of the day, we preach we have no control over you, and everyone's like, what? And we're like, no, we don't. No one has control over anyone,
Right.
right? It's a fantasy. Control is an illusion. So we let people self-select on that because some things could be very, traumatizing or very painful that people don't want to revisit or share. It's up to them. But a big part of it is sort of trying to find the person in the highest level of power in
Mm.
the organization, which could be by hierarchy or rank or compensation or organization size, and getting them to be vulnerable first. Because if it's okay for Bob, who's the division president, to talk about how he loses sleep at night over stuff, or how he gets really mad at himself, or the thing he has to do to calm himself down so he doesn't freak out at the board meeting. If it's okay for Bob to talk vulnerably, then it makes it okay for everybody else. But it's harder when it's like the most junior person who feels like they just scrapped to get in the company and they're like barely hanging on. They're not sure if they belong there. You're less likely to want to do that because there's some disincentive to doing that. But when you have more senior people, but senior people are trained to project perfection and good things, and we're beating the plan, and this is great, and I got promoted to this. And so we have to coach folks to say, hey, talk more. And this is kind of Brene Brown 101 stuff, right? Talk
Hmm.
more about your imperfections or your flaws, because that'll actually draw people rather than, oh, then we won this award. Then I went to, Stanford Graduate Business School, but I got into Harvard, but I chose Stanford. And just like all of that, people are like, they're just going to check out. But when you start to say something like, boy, did I really screw up. And that's the first time I got fired. People are like, what? And so
Yeah.
that's the part that brings us together. But that doesn't happen naturally. If you just threw people in a meeting room at a company, that doesn't happen. So you
Right.
have to have facilitation, you have to have structure, you have to have context, intention. And that's what our staff and our program bring to these things. And that's what other companies, they create their own or they buy ones from other companies. But that really fosters those environments. And sometimes it's an hour-long conversation with a senior executive that opens up even for 5 minutes of that hour about something like that, that just touches people and wakes them up in a way that they never could through memos and intranets and town halls and the traditional ways that we connect at a workplace.
Yeah. And are you doing this in person
All
mostly, or
virtual,
is it
all virtual. So we
all virtual still?
so we,
Yeah.
we started our company in 2015 as a remote first company. Everyone's like, you're never gonna have a culture. No one's gonna want to work there. People hate remote. Now, we put a job application up or job posting up last week. I think we got 1,500 applicants. I mean, we just get great talent because we've got great benefits and great culture and things, but we're remote first. We also started delivering remote first, virtual only. And it's really important actually for marginalized communities to do that because
Mm,
you look at, there's a whole bunch of different structural reasons, but people that are in multi-generational households may have, elder childcare or things to manage, so they can't fly to Boston for the week, right? People with different physical mobility or accessibility can't always do that. Certain people with neurodivergence, right? Being in a big loud room isn't necessarily the best environment for their learning. People that are in the field, right, that serve customers that aren't at the headquarters, there's a lot of proximity bias based upon if
mm,
we're near the power, right? And so that's a part of why we also do it virtually, is to really create that level playing field for everyone and allow people to connect often with colleagues. We do these cohorts of 25 people and executives, and they meet people inside their own company that they didn't know that they might not
mm.
if we did regional things at the regional office. One of my prouder moments is when we had we worked with utilities companies, and it was a water utility company. And there's a guy that was in West Texas, and he had a fluorescent orange vest on, and he was in the cab of a big F-350 commercial vehicle, and he was joining a group coaching session on his lunch break in a parking lot. And he would have never, like, their company is headquartered hundreds of miles from where he was.
Right.
He would have never gone to an emerging leader training session because he is asked to be out in the field and he can't miss work and they have a billable job. Like, but he was able to do it, and he was a former Marine. And he said, "This is the best leadership training I've had since the Marines." And it was about the fact that it was flexible and it was inclusive. And, and a
Mm.
lot of people, if you have, children in particular, if you're a working parent or single parent, you got to get out of work at a certain time. So it's harder to do development during the day, et cetera. So that's where, like, the digital and accessibility. But then there's different things you have to make sure that it's engaging and enticing and fun. We do a good job at that too. So
Well, clearly, I can tell already. So you were saying earlier, I loved when you were talking about, use the example, a secretary could be a great leader. It doesn't matter
sure.
what role you're in.
Yep.
So it's clearly a win-win for everybody, but what are the biggest inhibitors for organizations to invest in something like this?
So old paradigms is one of them, that they think in
Hmm.
this old way, right? It's like, oh, well, a leader has got to be this or that. So you have to kind of rework on, like, what do we mean? Have we defined what leadership means? Part of it is cost. I mean, a lot of executive education programs can be 10, 20, $30,000. One of the CEO of one of the water utility companies we work with, he went to this thing at Stanford and they sent him for 6 weeks. It was $80,000 and he was completely, like, he had coverage. He was the CEO. Amazing experience, but how many employees can you do that with? And would you do that with someone who's an executive assistant or receptionist or something like that? Probably not. That may be their whole salary is that amount. And so part of it is like keeping it affordable is a big part of it, changing the paradigm, and in particular, reaching further into the organization, because often we're developing people when they're already at the top. But how do you help people get to the top, or if that's what they
Hmm.
want, right? Or whatever it may
Right.
be. And if you grew up in a certain family and, privilege is just kind of how we wound up or what we were born into, it's nothing necessarily to feel good or bad about, but it's to be aware of and responsible for. And if you've got a dad or mom that takes you out, I don't know, golfing and talks to you about your career goals and how to advocate or how to, ask for a raise or these things, maybe an alumni association that's very supportive. Great. If you're first generation or you immigrated or you're from a family or you're estranged from your family, right, because they shunned you for being LGBTQ or anything else, you may not have some of those advantages. And so I think it's really important that we get these distinctions to people earlier in their career, not when they're 55 and they've got 5 or 10 years left in their career. They get the distinctions of, like, oh, you can advocate for yourself and solicit feedback from someone other than your manager and, make wake and all these different things. And here's how to do, these how to manage up. All these things are these sort of like secret menu things that we should
Hmm.
just be like, doesn't need, let's just put it on the menu.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love hearing about the accessibility factor too of the price that you were talking about, because this, like you said, like this one thing could be someone's full salary. You're not going to send them for that, but
Totally.
because you're doing it remotely and you can have someone tuning in on their lunch break from a tractor, I imagine you can have more people on the call and you don't
Totally.
have to worry about people, the cost of flying, the cost of food, the cost of housing all your teachers and all these things.
Totally. And I mean, we had a customer recently that brought up about 100 of their employees to, like, have a offsite for a day and a half. And, it was in Albany at, Crown Plaza. It wasn't like super glamorous or anything, but it still was hundreds of thousands of dollars for travel and this and the carbon footprint as we
Yep.
think about that. And then people have to get childcare and, all these things for, I mean, it was nice. We had a good time, but again, that means that there's a bunch of people at that company that aren't going to get to do that because of the cost. Whereas for the cost of each person going to that event, they could do a program like ours for 6 months. And so that's, again, it's not about making it cheap, like it's low quality. It's about being, and I think this is where people from marginalized backgrounds, they said necessity is the mother of invention. It's
Mm-hmm.
often a lot of creativity, and not just in like the visual arts, but like just being clever. Pilot, one
Mm-hmm.
of our values is inventive, right? Sort of.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we kind of think differently? Kind of what are these in betweens? And so that's where we've been able to say, hey, it doesn't have to be a crappy experience for it to be different. And I think Housing Works is one of our long-term customers, and they're here in New York City and have a dual mission to end HIV and homelessness. And they had a similar sort of perspective around supportive HIV housing, and they have the largest stock of HIV supportive housing in the country, private housing. And they said, why should HIV supportive housing suck? Why should it be ugly? Why should it feel like you're in some sort of like halfway house or something? And so they got a brownstone, and they had design within reach furniture all throughout it and everything else. And they made it like very, very, very nice. And they actually had better health outcomes for the patients, and
Mm-hmm.
people's sobriety was better, and all these other, their antiretroviral and treatments were better. All these things, their adherence was so much better. So I think that's what we try to, I think we can use it to our advantage when we come from these, marginalized backgrounds. And I think whether you're an employee or an entrepreneur, doesn't matter, but it's like thinking about how can we do it better?
Mm-hmm.
How can we use resources in a different way? We've got a competitor of ours that has raised $600 million. They have very famous people and celebrities involved and all these things. I founded the company with my life savings, and I'm from a lovely middle class family in Colorado. And so we don't have $600 million war chest at all. So we have to be more clever, but that's kind of help what we also teach people in this program. It's like, how do you use what you got? Because there's
Mm-hmm.
also a lot of things that money can't buy. And one of our values is
Mm-hmm.
thoughtfulness. And I can tell you, there's no amount of money that can buy thoughtfulness. Thoughtfulness is something that is uniquely honed and special. Money can help make you more thoughtful, but it won't make you thoughtful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. And great shout out to Housing Works. I absolutely love them as a New Yorker as well.
Yep.
That's whenever I am donating something, it
Yep.
goes to Housing Works. So for all you looking for wanting to do a little spring or summer clean and you want to make sure the money is going to a place that you support, Housing Works
Yep.
is a great one for the queer community.
And they if you're planning as a part of your Pride festivities, a cannabis related experience, they had the first license in the state of New York from the governor,
Oh
and their
yeah.
entire store management team as people that were, I think the term now is criminally justice involved. It used to be formerly incarcerated person, but criminally justice involved. So people that were essentially victims of a very unfair and biased war on drugs and laws that
Yep.
were, enforced differently based upon your race. And so they now manage the store, and they got the first legal dispensary license, and they deliver all over Manhattan for free and everything else. So they're a great organization, great to give money to, et cetera. But again, that's the cleverness, the inventiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's where we've been able to work with them and to help people have better outcomes for their patients and to do things in different ways. And I think that sense of empowerment, there's only so much that a C-suite team, like I know the CEO of Housing Works, I know the COO, I know the president, I know all these folks, the chief medical officer, they're great people and they're wonderful, but that's a $150 million organization or $2 million organization. It's got 1,500 employees now. They all, like, there's only so much that a team of 8 people can do. And so this is why developing leaders at all levels, that at the site in East New York, they can show up differently and manage differently in a way that they wouldn't do it in Hell's Kitchen. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of thing you have to foster from the leadership development internally. And we had one of our customer now there. She was a development rep. She helped fundraise, and she went through our program. Realized she was ready to maybe leave the organization, but always wanted to do people stuff and advocated to get into a HR role, or junior role. She's now the head of HR, and she's now the one that buys and implements our program. And she got that by creating the opportunity for herself. There was no career path. There was no
Right.
posting internally. And that's where I think a lot of times we think, especially with people from less sort of privileged backgrounds, are just like, oh, all the opportunities will be transparent. It'll be out there. I'll just log on. It's like over half of jobs are never posted anywhere ever. And people will take a chance on you because they know you. So you have to have a relationship, and you have to do these other things and make your desires known. And she would have otherwise left the organization. And instead, she's still working there years later doing amazing work at
Mm.
Housing Works. But we helped her find herself and advocate for herself. So all that success is her. We just were a platform to help facilitate herself.
I love that. How beautiful is that, that someone that was able to do the work and then transferred it into their own life and now is bringing it back around to you. And I just love that. That's such a beautiful story.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we only have a couple minutes left, if you can believe it or not. It's just been flying by. Um, so in this last few minutes, I'm curious, and you were just talking about HR. So for HR and DEI leaders, what are some other things they should and should we consider in making the case internally for investing in leadership development programs such as Pilot?
Think about going beyond your budget.
Mm.
I've never met someone who got fired in the corporate world for going over their budget. You can get in trouble sometimes, but sales and marketing will blow through the budgets all the time. IT, everything else. HR is a rule follower, and it's like, oh, if it's a penny over, I'm gone. So consider
Right.
one, spending more, getting approval, not having to be a big surprise, but also asking for other people's money. Because a lot of times when HR is like, oh, we don't have money or don't have staff, but I'm like, but your organization has money. So go to the exec
Mm,
sponsor of the BRG. We worked with a big pharmaceutical company. The exec sponsor of the Asian employee group, the AAPI group, was the chief science officer of a 90,000 person company.
mm,
He just funded it out of his discretionary chief science officer, discretion. So like a big part of this is just figuring out how to ask for money and find the
mm,
money. Because then you can
mm,
find
mm,
vendors like Power to Fly or Pilot or other people out there. There's a ton of great, providers out there, but it requires money, or you might need headcount. Headcount's even harder to get. So I would say like ask for money and ask for third-party program support, because that's like the fastest path, but don't limit it to your budget. Because if you ask for money, you make the difference. I mean, this is the people like the woman at Housing Works. I mean, if someone had not asked for the money to invest in the program, she would have not had that experience, and she would have left and maybe never found her true calling and never impacted people. So there's so much at stake in the most upside ways. And I think with all the culture wars and the marginalization of, queer and trans people and everything else like that, we have to continue to double down on DEI efforts. And that can't be, even if the external messaging and stuff is kind of getting dialed back in a little bit, I think the internal part has to be full force ahead, because
mm.
our colleagues need to know that their employers have their back and care about them.
Absolutely. Preach. How can we keep the conversation going with you, Ben? What's the best way for folks to reach out?
I would love, I'm big on LinkedIn. I talk to a ton of people on LinkedIn. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're an Instagrammer, I share a lot of my personal life there too, Ben Brooks NY, and then pilot.coach is our website. So if we could ever be supportive, we have a bunch of free resources, articles, assessments, etc. That's all there, but pilot.coach, we can help as well. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you, and I'll see you on the LinkedIn's.
yeah, I'll have to go rewatch The Outs now. I'm very excited. If y'all haven't watched The Outs, that's my other thing. Go watch The Outs. It's a great show.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that.